My name is Claire. I turned 47 2 weeks before I stood on the back steps of my father's old house, staring at the ghost of a greenhouse that once held everything together. The glass panes were smudged with mildew and spiderwebs, some cracked, others missing altogether. Ivy had claimed one side completely, growing through the broken window panes like veins in aging skin. Still, there was something beautiful in it. Fragile. Haunting. A sort of quiet defiance that reminded me of the man who built it. It had been 15 years since I last lived here. The town felt smaller now, grayer, wetter, as though it had sagged into itself over time. Just like me. After my father passed away, I inherited the house, the debt, and the impossible silence that followed. My husband and I had separated just 6 months before the funeral. Not in anger, just fatigue. A long, slow fade into politeness. I wasn't expecting company when I moved in. But 2 days after the funeral, I got the message. Hey Claire. Sorry about your dad. I heard you're back in Oregon. Let me know if you need help with the greenhouse. He always wanted it fixed up. It was from Eli, my stepson. I stared at the text for almost an hour, unsure how to respond. He wasn't my blood. I had only been married to his father for 5 years, and he was already in high school by then. But something about the way he said, let me know, not as an offer, but as a quiet intention, made me type back before I could think too hard. If you're serious, I could use the help. He arrived 2 days later. I opened the door to a man I didn't quite recognize. Taller, broader, with sun-warmed skin and hair tied back in a low knot. He smelled faintly of citrus and moss, like the outdoors had claimed him as its own. Claire, he said, smiling in that easy way I remembered. You haven't changed. I laughed softly, even though I knew I had. And you? I wouldn't have known you in a crowd. Well, he said, stepping inside. It's been a while. He carried only a backpack and a canvas tool bag, slung over one shoulder, like it was part of him. We didn't hug. Just stood there for a moment. Two people connected by a past that was neither simple nor complicated, just unfinished. I figured we'd start with the back, he said. Unless you want to do a full house tour first. I'm not sure the house is ready for visitors yet, I replied, motioning toward the back door. But the greenhouse hasn't given up completely. Outside, the afternoon sun was slipping through thick clouds. The air smelled of earth and salt, the sea only a mile off, hidden behind old pine trees and fog. Eli stood in front of the greenhouse for a long time, one hand on his hip, the other resting lightly on the ivy-choked frame. She's holding up better than I thought, he murmured. He built this whole thing from scrap, you know that? I remember the weekend he finished the frame, I said. He came in covered in cuts and grease, swore he'd never do it again. Then the next morning, he was back out there sealing the roof panels. Eli smiled, stepping closer to the door and trying the handle. It groaned, but didn't resist. Inside, it was warm, damp. A soft hush settled over us as we stepped through. Some of the old tables were still standing, half buried in dirt and dead vines. Rusted tools hung on crooked nails, and in the far corner, I spotted a single pot, green shoot curling up toward the light like it had never been forgotten. He tried to grow orchids in here, remember? I asked. He told me they were stubborn, Eli replied. Said he respected that. We worked in silence for the next hour, pulling ivy, sweeping glass, clearing space. Every so often, I'd glance over and catch him watching the way the sunlight hit a corner or checking the angles of the beams. He moved with confidence, like this place was a blueprint in his mind. And maybe it was. You still working in environmental restoration? I asked as I knelt to gather fallen leaves. Yeah, he said, without looking up. Mostly green infrastructure now. Roof gardens, living walls. But this. He gestured to the greenhouse. This is what made me want to start. I looked at him, then really looked. His hands, rough but steady. The way he squinted up at the old vent fan like he was calculating the years in its rust. This place mattered to him, he added. And to me. I nodded, brushing hair from my face. It mattered to me too. I just forgot how much. We broke for tea at dusk. I boiled water in the old copper kettle my father used to swear gave the water a better flavor. We sat on the back porch, watching the glass panes catch the last light of the day. Eli leaned back, legs stretched out, mug cradled in his hands. You ever think of leaving again? He asked. I hadn't even thought of coming back, I admitted. But now, I'm not sure. He looked over, his expression unreadable. Sometimes it takes returning to a place to realize it still holds part of you. We sat in silence after that. And for the first time since I moved back, the quiet didn't feel so heavy. The next morning, the sky was a low blanket of pale gray. The kind of weather that made the world feel like it hadn't fully woken up yet. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug in hand, watching Eli through the glass as he moved across the backyard. He was wearing a hoodie and old jeans, a pair of leather gloves tucked into his back pocket. He worked without rush, his movements precise, calm. It was strange to see a grown man out there where I used to watch him as a teenager hunched over a garden bed, still thin and restless. He caught me watching. Instead of looking away, he waved the gloves in the air like a flag. I raised my mug in return, smiling behind it, then turned to finish slicing the last of the bread for breakfast. When he came inside, the kitchen warmed with his presence instantly. I forgot how cold Oregon mornings get, he said, running a hand through damp hair. My hoodie's losing the fight. Should have brought a proper coat, I teased, sliding the butter dish closer to him. Or maybe you just wanted an excuse to borrow one of mine. He grinned as he sat at the small round table. You offering? No, I replied, sitting across from him, but I'd enjoy watching you try to squeeze into my cardigans. He laughed, and I felt something soft stir in my chest. It was so easy being near him, comfortable in a way I hadn't expected. I tore a piece of bread and watched him spread jam on his toast like he'd done this here 100 times. I forgot how good it smells in this house, he said, glancing around. That mix of wood and lemon soap. Probably just leftover from the last time someone actually cared about cleaning. Don't sell yourself short. You were always the type to alphabetize the spice rack. I raised an eyebrow. You remember that? Hard to forget when you scolded me for putting the oregano next to the cinnamon. I gave a playful shrug. It was a system. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I liked your systems.
I didn't respond to that.
Not because I didn't know what to say, but because the way he was looking at me made my throat catch. Familiar, steady, just a little too direct for the hour. He seemed to feel it too. After breakfast, we headed back to the greenhouse together. I slipped on my old gardening gloves, the ones with a faded blue trim, and stepped inside behind him. You sure these beams will hold? I asked, tilting my head toward the ceiling. They'll be fine, he said, stepping up beside me. I reinforced the crossbars yesterday. I looked up, then sideways, and realized how close we were standing. His arm brushed against mine, warm even through the sleeve. I didn't move. Neither did he. You've got dirt on your cheek, he said suddenly. Oh. I reached up blindly. Wrong side, he murmured. And then he did it. Lifted his thumb gently and swiped it across my cheekbone, just beneath my eye. The touch was brief, but the feeling lingered like a blush that didn't know whether to rise or retreat. There, he said. I cleared my throat. Thanks. He stepped back. Don't worry. I won't start mothering you in return. That's a relief, I said, turning toward the workbench. I don't think I could survive your cooking. Hey, he protested, following me. You don't know what you're missing. I've mastered the art of toast. Toast, huh? I smirked. You'll be a hit at all the dinner parties. We settled into work again, the banter lingering between us, like the scent of lavender and damp soil. I watched him carefully handle the old glass panes, replacing cracked ones with new, clear cuts he'd brought from town. "You've got good hands," I said without thinking. He glanced up, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "You watching me again?" "I'm observing. Big difference." He chuckled. "Well, observation noted." An hour later, we were side by side again, this time kneeling in the corner, clearing out an overgrown stretch of planter boxes. I reached for a stubborn root just as he did, our hands brushing. I felt the heat of it travel up my arm like a current. He didn't pull away right away. Instead, his fingers curled slightly before he let go. And then he said, low and quiet, "You always had warm hands." I looked at him, and he looked back. Long enough that the air between us felt thin. Long enough that I forgot what we were even pulling. "Claire," he said softly, his voice shifting. "Yeah." But before he could answer, the sky opened outside with a sudden downpour that slapped against the glass with startling force. I jumped slightly, laughing at the surprise. "Well," I said, rising to my feet, "so much for the forecast. Looks like we're trapped," he said, stepping closer to the glass wall, peering out at the gray blur. "I don't mind," I admitted, brushing dirt from my knees. He turned toward me, a light in his eyes. "Neither do I." And neither of us moved for a long while. The greenhouse turned dim as the storm settled in. Rain clattered against the roof like 1,000 urgent fingers tapping to be let inside, but we were already there, sealed in, 2 breaths in a glass box thick with warmth and the smell of damp earth. Eli moved to close the wooden side shutters, rain misting in through the gaps. I stood near the back bench, arms crossed, not out of cold but to hold in something else. Nervous energy, maybe. Or something more tender. "Well," he said, shaking droplets from his sleeves. "Looks like we're stuck for a while. Trapped in a glass box with the woman who once banned you from the kitchen for salting pasta water too early," I replied with a half-smile. He grinned. "The trauma still lingers." I laughed, a low sound that caught in my chest. The rain muffled the outside world to nothing. All that remained was this soft space, greenhouse walls fogging slightly from our breath, garden tools drying by the door, and a quiet that neither of us seemed eager to fill with unnecessary words. Eli walked over and grabbed a folded blanket from a plastic tub near the bench. "You always have supplies stashed somewhere," he said, tossing it onto the bench before settling down. "Old habit," I said, sitting beside him. "This place used to get cold at night. Dad and I once stayed out here until almost midnight trying to save a tomato vine he refused to give up on." He chuckled. "That sounds like him." Silence again. But this time it felt heavy with meaning. The rain wasn't slowing, so we didn't pretend we were leaving. He stretched out his legs, boots crossed at the ankle, one arm draped behind the bench's edge. His fingers lightly brushed the back of my shoulder. Not a mistake. I didn't flinch. I looked over at him instead, curious, cautious. "What?" he asked, a faint smile on his lips. "I was just thinking," I said softly. "You've changed." "So have you," he replied, eyes warm but steady. "But not in the way you think." The way he said it made my heart flutter. I looked down at my hands, dirt still under the nails, palms dry from working. Nothing glamorous. Nothing extraordinary. But his gaze felt like it saw something I hadn't in a long time. He shifted, slightly closer. His arm now firmly behind me on the bench. "Do you remember the day I left for college?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "Of course. You had 2 suitcases and a terrible haircut." He laughed. "I was nervous. Trying to look grown up." "You looked terrified." I was. But not about school. I turned toward him, confused. He leaned forward just a bit, his voice dropping. "I was afraid of losing this. You. That connection we had. It meant more than I ever said." I didn't know what to say at first. So I let the truth find me on its own. I missed you, I admitted. Probably more than I let myself believe. He looked at me then, not like a stepson, not like a visitor, but like a man remembering the one person who had seen him clearly through every version of himself. Outside, thunder cracked low and distant. Inside, our closeness had narrowed to inches. You always made me feel seen, he said, even when I was too young to say it out loud. You were never just a kid to me, I whispered. Not really. He reached up then, slow, giving space. His fingers tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with more care than I expected. His knuckles brushed my jaw. My eyes fluttered at the touch. Claire, he began, his voice catching in the smallest of ways. My breath was shallow. My heart thudded in my chest, fast and uncertain. We shouldn't. I know, he said quietly, though his hand stayed exactly where it was. But do you want me to stop? The question lingered. Not a demand. A doorway. Rain slid down the glass in silver streaks, the storm still howling, but neither of us moved. Not away. Not yet. His question hovered in the silence between us. My breath was tight in my chest, heart hammering like a warning, or maybe a countdown. I didn't answer him. Not with words. But I didn't pull away either. Maybe that was answer enough. Then, without a single warning, Eli stood up. And before I could ask what he was doing, he turned, bent slightly, and, "Wait," I yelped, half laughing, half shocked. He swept me up into his arms, as if I weighed nothing at all. I gasped, my arms instinctively wrapping around his shoulders, heart racing, not from fear, but from something wilder. His eyes sparkled with something unspoken, joy, mischief, something freer than I'd seen in a long time. "What are you doing?" I demanded, breathless. He grinned. "Something you'll never forget." Then he kicked open the greenhouse door and carried me straight out into the rain. The cold hit me like a slap and a kiss all at once. Fat drops poured down, soaking us in seconds. My hair clung to my cheeks, my shirt stuck to my skin, and I could barely see through the blur of storm and spinning sky because Eli was spinning me in his arms, right there in the middle of the garden. The grass slick beneath his boots, his laughter cutting through the downpour like sunlight. He held me tightly, spinning faster, like we were dancing through the storm and nothing else in the world existed. I laughed harder than I had in years. A deep, belly-deep joy that felt reckless and young and real. My head tilted back, raindrops slipping down my throat as the sky spun overhead. I could feel the strength in his arms, the way his chest rose and fell against mine, his breath quick and warm on my neck. When he finally stopped spinning, we stood there, soaked, panting, laughing, just staring at each other in the rain. "You're insane," I said, pushing my wet hair from my eyes. "And you," he said softly, "are glowing." And then I kissed him. There wasn't a moment to think. No lead-up, no inner monologue, no guilt or hesitation. I just kissed him, right there in the middle of the storm. My hands tangled in his wet hair, his mouth warm and breathless against mine. His arms tightened around my waist, holding me like he was afraid I'd vanish, like this moment might dissolve if he didn't anchor it. We kissed like people who had been holding back for too long, desperate and tender all at once. The rain poured harder, but I didn't care. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his forehead resting gently against mine. "Claire," he whispered, voice low, shaken. I nodded, water dripping down both our faces. "I know." And I did know. I knew that everything had changed in that kiss. That no matter what came next, no matter what we decided or denied, this wasn't something we could undo. The rain slowed. The garden shimmered in mist. And the two of us stood in the middle of it, holding on to something we didn't have words for yet. Only each other. By the time we stumbled back inside the greenhouse, we were both dripping wet, and out of breath. My heart was still racing, not just from the spin or the storm, but from the way Eli had looked at me just before I kissed him. Like he'd been waiting for that moment, quietly, for years. We didn't speak at first. He pulled the door shut behind us, the storm still whispering outside. The sudden warmth inside the glass walls wrapped around us, thick and humid. I peeled off my soaked jacket, brushing my hair back, and tried to steady my breathing. Eli stood a few steps away, chest rising and falling, water trickling down the side of his neck. His shirt clung to him, soaked through, his eyes locked on mine. "I didn't plan that," I said softly, breaking the silence. He smiled faintly. "You think I did?" "I don't know," I admitted, shaking my head. "But I haven't felt like that in a long time."
He took a step toward me.
Then another. "I've been holding back for a long time," he said quietly, trying to convince myself it was just nostalgia, just comfort. "But when you kissed me, I wasn't supposed to. I'm glad you did." His voice cracked just slightly on those last words. We stood there, barely inches apart, water pooling at our feet. "I don't know what happens next," I said, truthfully. "I didn't expect any of this. You were just coming to help." He gave a slow nod, his gaze never leaving mine. "I didn't expect it either. But being here with you, Claire, it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like I can finally breathe again." I looked away, heart in my throat. "You're younger than me. You're my stepson."
"Was," he said.
"A long time ago. And it's not the name that matters. It's the connection. And I've felt it with you since before I even knew how to name it." That hit me harder than I expected. I sank slowly onto the bench, the blanket from earlier still draped over it. Eli sat beside me, not too close, but not far either. We both stared at the misty glass, listening to the rain taper into soft drizzles. "I used to sit right here," he said quietly, "when I was 17. I'd sneak out to the greenhouse after school, just to get away. You'd come out sometimes with tea or a sandwich, pretend you weren't checking on me. I was always checking on you. I know. That's why it meant so much." He leaned back, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "Those afternoons? They got me through a lot." I turned to him slowly. I didn't know that. I didn't know how to say it then. But now, he looked at me. "I don't want to hold back anymore. Not if you feel the same." The truth burned on the edge of my lips.
I did feel the same.
But I was also afraid of what it meant, what it might undo, of crossing a line and finding it wasn't as invisible as it felt. "I'm scared," I admitted.
"So am I," he said.
We looked at each other in the hush that followed. The rain outside had stopped completely now, leaving only the soft creak of settling glass and the heartbeat pulse between us. He reached out, slowly, his fingers brushing mine on the bench. Just a touch. No pressure. An invitation. And this time, I didn't pull away.